In the Middle Ages, books were made from parchment, also known as vellum, which came from the skin of animals. Parchment is extremely durable and can last for more than 1,000 years in perfect condition. The parchment maker was responsible for the slow and laborious process of transforming the skin to a surface suitable for writing. To start, the parchment maker would wash the skin in cold, clear running water for 24 hours and then soak the skins in lime water for approximately 3 to 10 days. This process cleans the skin and loosens the hair. Draped over a wooden beam, the parchment maker would scrape the hair and flesh off, revealing the bare skin underneath. This skin is then washed with water to rinse off the lime. The skin is then stretched taut on a frame. To attach the skin to the frame, the parchment maker would form knobs on the edges of the skin using stones and then attach them to a revolving peg with cord. If the parchment maker were to nail the skin into the frame, the skin would tear as it dries and shrinks. The rubbery, still wet skin is then vigorously scraped with a lunellum to the desired thickness. A lunellum is a knife with a curved blade and a central handle. Finally, the skin is allowed to dry, released from the frame, cut into large rectangles, and sold. A paper that was to be folded in half is called a bifolium. Bifolia were nested together to form a gathering. Gatherings were then laid on top of each other and stitched together to make a book. The size of gatherings varied, however, it was commonly 8 leaves or 4 bifolia. With very few exceptions, the pages were assembled so that hair faced hair and flesh faced flesh. Now we will make our own manuscript from a piece of parchment. This right here is a poster board which I have colored on one side. This would be the hair side, and then the other side would presumably be flesh. So you want to take this piece of paper and fold it in half. This right here is a bifolium. Now if you were to fold it in half again, this is a quarto. Now one last time, fold it in half and you have an octavo. Now if you were to take a pair of scissors and cut along the crease to separate the pages, you would have 8 pages. So that's why it's called an octavo. Now, as you can see, if you open up the pages, the same colored sides automatically face each other. Now, before we start writing in our gathering, the pages need to be ruled. Scribes would usually use something like a stylus to make indents or something similar to graphite. We are going to use a pencil and just quickly make some margins. Now, typically, this would be a very calculated process and formatted to reflect the content and purpose of the book, but we are just going to make one column with a few margins. Instead of using pens and pencils, scribes would use quills. Now, this is an example of a quill with already a sharpened edge, if you can see that right here. Usually the feathers would be cut off and they would prepare many before they start writing, but this is just an example of one, and they would typically hold it straight up and down somewhat like this. Ink making was its own specialty, and ink makers would use a variety of materials to make their colors. Oak gals were used to make black ink. They were combined with this substance right here. It's called gum arabic, which is used to thicken and make the ink sticky. This is lapis lazuli, which is used to make blue ink, saffron to make yellow, and vermilion and madder root both made red. Before the scribe can start writing, they would have to set out some space for the illuminations. Say we would want to start our book off with a decorated initial. We would section off a space for the drop-down initial, and if we wanted to include an illumination on this page, we would have to leave it blank. The scribe and the illuminator would work very closely together to design the manuscript, similarly to the production of a comic book. Now, once the scribe was ready to start writing, they would have their quill, and they would also carry a knife. This knife was used to hold down the page as they wrote. It was also used to sharpen the quill and erase mistakes. Once the scribe was done writing, it was now the illustrator's turn. The illustrator, say if they wanted to decorate this initial, would first outline the design that they wanted to draw, then fill it in with gold leaf, and then finally color the rest of the initial. Once everything was done, the gatherings would be collected and bound together. We will now look at an example of a finished product.
Hi, this is Dot Porter. I'm the Curator for Digital Research Services in the Kislak Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm here with Julie Swee, and we are going to look at MS Codex 1056. This is a book of hours that we have in our collections here. So the manuscript itself was written in Rouen, France in about 1475. So let's open this up. It's written on parchment, which, as I think you already know, is made of animal skin. This is pretty nice parchment. It's a little bit yellow, but it's still pretty creamy. Particularly with really nice parchment like this, it's easier to tell hair from flesh when you can touch it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This right here is the hair side. And I can tell that it's the hair side because it feels very soft, and it's almost like a peach. I think of it as like peachy. And sometimes you can tell the hair side because there are hair follicles. And then the flesh side is, again, it's a little difficult to tell, I think, in the video, but the flesh side is going to be smooth and sort of shiny, so it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't have that kind of peachy feeling to it. It feels more like paper. If the quality isn't so good, the color can be quite different. So you will have a flesh side that's very light colored and hair side that's a lot darker. I think throughout this manuscript, all of the initials, this large one, but also the smaller ones, and some of the illuminations do have gold leaf. And so gold leaf was basically gold that had been hammered until it was very, very thin, really thin. And then it would be glued down. So you'd sort of glue it down and rub on it and rub on it and rub on it, and then blow the rest of the gold away. And then you have what ends up being a very shiny thing. So that's a sign of wealth when you see gold leaf. Gold paint would have been gold that was dissolved into a paint and sort of painted on. So it would have been a lot less work to put it into the manuscript, because you're talking about painting with it like you would paint with any other paint, as opposed to working with gold leaf, which would have been a lot more involved. And it's also less expensive because of that, and because it would take actually less gold to make gold paint than it would to make gold leaf. And so since we're at this page, we can maybe talk about the illuminations a little bit. So this is a really nice example of just a border, a sort of extended border. So this is the same kind of border that we see on pretty much every page, I think, don't we? Yeah, we get that on every page. So that's really nice. And then we also see these full page illuminations, which serve to illustrate. It's going to be mostly biblical stories, and it will be associated with whatever is happening at that point in the book. So there's one in the back of this that I think is really interesting. There we go. So this is, you can all probably recognize this. This is Christ has been taken down from the cross, and he's dead, and his mother is there with him. And then you see this woman over here with a black wimple, I think it's called, and she's very nice in this dress. This is actually a portrait of the person who paid to have this manuscript made. So this was a really typical thing to do. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so we can take a closer look at her. It was really typical for people to pay, obviously they paid to have the book made, and then to have themselves included at various points. So you might have, as this person has done, she's actually been drawn into the portrait of Christ, or they could have their own separate portrait as well, but it's sort of a way of injecting themselves into the book.
It's important to keep in mind that the parchment maker, scribe, and illuminator were often different people that needed to work together to produce the final manuscript. I hope you now have a better understanding of how manuscripts are made and how much work it takes to make one.